bit like childbirth. It's hard at the time, but
you do it again.
Yeah.
I love your tagline. It was not horrendous at all.
The best part was meeting Flora, of course. Working with Flora. What made you want to be a social worker?
To work with people like you, Helen. So my name's Flora Dawson. I'm one of the supervising social workers at Community Foster Care. This is Helen, who we have recently completed what we call a therapeutic fostering assessment with. So the therapeutic fostering assessment was designed to help applicants consider trauma that some of the children who come into care will have experienced, and that really has underpinned the whole assessment process. So the therapeutic fostering assessment was designed and started to replace the Form F, which is what most applicants will be aware of. So the therapeutic fostering assessment is also teamed with what we call the therapeutic fostering qualification as well, and that bit replaced the skills to foster. So combining those two elements is 6 modules on trauma-informed fostering, which goes hand in hand with the actual assessment itself as well. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I've done both the skills for fostering and the TFA. When I did the skills for fostering, it was in a small group setting. It was all face to face, and the TFAs are all online. It's quite intensive, really thought provoking. We're told that most children who come into the care system do so because they've suffered some form of trauma, and it becomes very evident when you're going through the training. It covers every aspect of what we might come across, I suppose.
I think it's designed to make sure that the carers, the applicants, are aware of behaviours that we can associate and kind of explain through their previous experiences of trauma. But it also looks at the applicant's life as well, and we really do unpick what they've been through. It's really useful for us as professionals to know, not because we're nosy, but because we can then work out what certain triggers are for foster carers, or where certain situations might be quite difficult to manage. And that level of understanding has really helped us to think about matching children with foster carers, and also to support them through what is effectively very challenging and tricky situations sometimes. So I feel that TFA is a wonderful opportunity for supervising social workers to get to know the applicants extremely well, and that information informs matching children with foster carers, but also their ongoing support through community foster care as well. And I think it's just important to kind of outline, it's not about us expecting that foster carers have lived these perfect lives as such. We understand that every applicant comes with a life, because we all have lives, but it's an understanding and a reflection that they have on their previous experiences and how that will underpin them as carers. Because I think we can all relate to the idea that when you are put under stress or in situations that can feel very challenging, we respond differently, and all of those different responses are completely informed by our previous experiences. So if we have an understanding of that from the application onwards, then we can best adapt and support carers.
Well, yeah, I learned from scratch about how trauma affects children's behaviour. You know that different experiences, different life experiences affect children in every way, be it good experiences or bad experiences. But this TFQ really looks in depth about how physically it affects children as well. So I think you get a better understanding on why the behaviour affects them. If it's just a child being naughty, for example, you might think, oh, it's just a child being naughty. But when you start to delve into what they've experienced through life, being, naughty is for want of a better word, because it's just displaying a different behaviour. You start to understand it, and I think you can have more empathy towards the child because you understand where it's coming from, rather than just try and challenge that behaviour. It gets you thinking as to how you can understand it and better help them work through it.
Seeing Helen go through that TFQ, but also the TFA assessment with me, has been a lovely opportunity for us to kind of develop that understanding from initial visit onwards, because one of the realities of being a foster carer is you will come across other professionals, other children, other parents, whoever, who may view certain behaviours or brand them as, oh, the child who causes issues. And we know through this training and through the assessment that that's not how trauma works, and there is often a reason for why they display certain behaviours, which can then be used to inform other people's thoughts and views and support of that child. So we're kind of creating these very trauma-informed advocates for children who we call foster carers.
I suppose ultimately children are children, and you never, even a child who's never in their life suffered any trauma, you're still going to get behaviour that's challenging because they're children. But this process just highlights some of the reasons why they might be doing that, and what's affecting them and what they're actually having to go through just to get through a normal day. It's so much harder for them because of what they've had to experience. You can't just treat them like you would an average child that hasn't been through any traumatic experiences. You've got to treat them slightly differently. But I don't imagine it's without rewards, because if you treat them with empathy, and you can have the patience and the understanding of where they're coming from, it can only reap benefits, and you're going to get a child who improves, and that must be, a massive. The best part was meeting Flora, of course. Working with Flora. Just before I'd gone through the TFA, I did an understanding autism course. I'd had experience with an autistic child, and I'd done a couple of courses. I just had this real interest in autism. I wanted to know more, just for my own benefit. There were aspects of the TFQ that cover not so much autism, but traits that I think are like autism, and I found it fascinating linking different behaviours and seeing how different behaviours can tie with different things.
I would say the best bit about TFA process, which feels pretty unique, I think, is that you get to know your assessor and the applicant really well. So it requires you to dig deep in someone's past in a supportive and professional way. The more open and honest you can be, the better, really, because, as I said previously, it's really important that we understand where you've been in your life, what you've been through, who you are as a person. And I think the key to a successful assessment is having that relationship with an applicant and that trust that that information will be used to inform decisions, whether you become a foster carer, but mostly decisions around matching and the future of a foster child with you. It's not about catching anyone out, it's not about being nosy, it's just about getting to know that person. And as a professional going through it, that's really quite unique, because it can feel quite a personal journey that you go on with the applicant. So to see an applicant through from an initial inquiry all the way to panel, which is what Helen's been through, is a bit of a privilege, really, because I know the amount of work she's had to do and the amount of digging deep and the amount of conversations we've had about life that has informed that decision. So I think it's quite a privilege to be privy to those conversations, and the key to that working, and the best bit about the TFA is that absolutely is determined by your relationship with the applicant, who in this case Helen was so open, so honest, so willing to think and reflect, so it felt quite easy which was helpful.
You'd never say it was an enjoyable process, because you're remembering things, that both nice things and not so nice things that have happened throughout your life, and you basically go back to young childhood. So anything significant or insignificant that's happened during your life, you chat about it, and it's pointless not bringing significant things up, because they're there to be aired and to reflect on, and hopefully to work on building towards helping you help children. Experiences that I've been through, who knows, it might help a child in the future. It might help me to react to what a child's going through. So it's everything's relevant. It's just a process that's quite in depth, like very, very in depth. I suppose it could seem intrusive, but not in the bad sense of the word. It's not nosy, it's not probing. It's just being interested in every aspect of my life, because my life needs to be known about in order to help others. The TFQ is an online course with a lady called Sarah Naish is the head of it. She's devised this whole programme.
Yeah, so that bit is done predominantly by the applicant, and then as the assessing social worker, we get feedback provided through the TFQ on how they are doing, and then that information and that training informs the TFA throughout it as well. But then there are parts of the TFA which I would task Helen with doing prior to me visiting, and then we would assess that or review it together. And that information that Helen provided, be it about interests, hobbies, or anything like that, would then inform my next session with her. So there's a section of the TFA where we ask applicants to do a life story. So that could be in a video, it could be written, it could be an interpretive dance, I don't know. But Helen chose to do a video, and it was a really thorough, really reflective video that took us through her journey, through her life. So I received that video, and then with that information, that informed me what I wanted to do in, say, a supportive interview on that video, just to explore more things. So it kind of worked out where we do a bit together. Helen would go away and think and complete some of the TFA, and then send it over to me, and then we'd review that in a session together. So it's a bit of back and forth, but each person's unique, and each assessor should develop their own way of getting applicants through that process.
So you know Helen inside and out, and Helen doesn't know anything about you.
So Helen knows. So this is really interesting, because you do get to know someone so well, and obviously this is a professional relationship because I would be assessing her to become a foster carer, but you do get to know someone personally because you need that level of trust in order to have really big, open, reflective conversations. And it is interesting because I'm obviously coming in expecting Helen to bear everything to me, and then she doesn't know much about me. So it's a fine line as a professional, especially a supervising social worker role, which I feel is unique in the social work world, where you do get to know someone a bit more on a personal level. Obviously, there's always those professional boundaries. It's required in order for us to learn about Helen. So there's bits of both. You know some bits about me, but you don't need to know everything.
I know the interesting bits.
You know the interesting bits. There's not many. No. But you have to have that rapport with someone, and I think one of the things that we've got in common is we've both got the same sense of humour, so that helps.
It gets to a point, if I knew Flora was coming, it's certainly not one of those, you think, oh, the social worker's coming on Tuesday. Oh, I've got to do this in preparation, but it's nothing like that at all. It's something you quite look forward to, and I don't know, Flora's made it just so it's more of it's a nice conversation. It's like a friendly conversation. Obviously, we cover the topics that we need to, but it's not a chore, because fostering is what you want to do at the end. You know that the training is it's got to be a really in-depth, thorough process. It's a bit like childbirth. It's hard at the time, but
You do it again.
you look back and you think, oh, that wasn't too bad. Yeah, it wasn't horrendous at all.
I think the important thing from an assessor's point of view as well is to find that light and shade in these kind of assessments, because they could be so weighty and or feel quite laborious, I think. Also really traumatic for the applicant sometimes, and I wouldn't want to unearth things that people aren't willing to talk about or haven't processed. That is not the case at all. It comes hand in hand with also making sure you have a bit of lightness with it, and I think we get that balance right, where we have a bit of a joke but also understand that this is an assessment.
I love your tagline. It was not horrendous at all.
Sorry, can you edit all the naff bits out? I'm sort of conscious that other people might look at this and be prospective foster carers.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to do is like think, I don't want to do that. It's but you don't want to go, oh, I think I said at one point, oh, it was a bit of a breeze, really. Well, no, it's not a breeze, but it's not horrendous. One of the requirements is that you've got to have your house in a reasonable state to bring a child, and my house didn't have central heating, and I've struggled for nearly 2 years to get central heating, and I think that was the biggest challenge, believe it or not, just getting something done on the house that needed to be done.
I think the challenge that Helen's referring to as well is that there's this TFA side of it, which is very therapeutic and reflective, but ultimately it's an assessment to foster a child, and we need to do health and safety checks, we need to do references, there's all those aspects that go into a Form F which are still there. So that side of it can feel a bit laborious sometimes in terms of getting bits finished off in the house or chasing people for certain things, but that's just part and parcel of an assessment, which ultimately is a really big piece of work. So there's all sorts of things that we have to make sure we check.
Making sure your car's got business insurance, making sure your house has got business insurance, making sure your house is safe and adequately furnished, and what sort of people are around you. I suppose really what sort of person you are, like how you get on with your neighbours. And
that's so interesting actually, because the bits you're talking about make me think about the dilemma for fostering in general, which is that grey area between being a professional parent and then being like a parent, because obviously what comes with being like a parent is that unconditional love that we'd expect a foster carer to provide for a child, but at the same time you are a professional parent, you're a paid foster carer, and with that comes certain expectations and requirements and to some degree limitations. So in terms of the delegated authority which you would be able to use once you approve and you have a child placed with you, there's limits to that, and that's a conversation to have with a social worker or to assess the risk of. So it's that confusing at times dynamic between we expect foster carers to provide the love and warmth of a parent, but also appreciate that they are a professional parent and there's regulations for that. So I wonder if that's maybe the biggest challenge, not just for the TFA, but for being a foster carer in general, is constantly working against those two things, which can sometimes, at times, feel like they work against each other.
Having not had a placement yet, obviously I haven't experienced that. I've had my own 4 children, and so I know what being a parent is. I know how I want any foster child to feel loved and wanted, and hopefully building confidence. I'm just thinking in my own naive sort of way that the rest will come along, because the most important thing is to make the child feel safe. The other dynamics I'll just have to learn. But I've not experienced it, so I can't really sort of comment on how that does work.
Thinking about an applicant who's thinking about fostering and their journey through it is being prepared that it may feel invasive. It's not meant to feel invasive, but it may feel invasive. It is supportive, but we do require you to share information about yourself, but also maybe to think about that dynamic between being a parent and being a professional parent, and they are different things, and that takes a long time for some carers to kind of work out in their heads the idea that you will be fostering a child and providing parental support or love, but you don't have parental responsibility, and you will never as a foster carer. That is delegated to you. Parental responsibility lies with the birth family and the local authority sometimes. So that can feel quite tricky to navigate and prepare for, because as a parent, you can't prepare for having to share that responsibility with other agencies. So I would suggest that is thought about, but that's also the role of the supervisor and social worker to help you navigate that, because it can feel a bit tricky at times.
What made you want to be a social worker?
To work with people like you, Helen. I think there's all sorts of reasons, but helping people and make better lives for people who are vulnerable. So in this case, it would be helping foster carers to provide a loving home for children who haven't had that opportunity. And it's a privilege to watch, and like little things like I've watched you come the whole way through this process and see you literally
Get
the
really
days
excited
before.
about getting
Yeah,
a
yeah.
placement.
And the days before you will have your first placement, and that's amazingly rewarding to see you, like, meet you the first time all the way through panel, through the assessment, all that process to at the stage where you're about to have your first child placed with you is amazing, isn't it? And to see how you've changed, but also like what I've learned through that process as well. So I think I love being a social worker because you never know what you're going to get, but you're just constantly learning, really. But doing it with people who are on the same journey but different journeys like yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great.